statements. I used this as a source for understanding Puerto Rico y Puerto Ricanos. The Beginnings of Colonization by Alberto Lopez. At the time of Christopher Columbus' arrival, there were in Borquén between 30,000 and 50,000 Taínos. Borquén was the island, is the name that the Indians had of the island that now we call Puerto Rico. Borquén, between 30,000 and 50,000 Taínos. They were a handsome people described by the Spaniards as short, strong, copper-colored with straight black hair. They were also an extremely clean people who ordinarily went about naked and who bathed themselves in the river several times a day. They lived in villages of around 300 to 600 people. The Taino religion, remember Columbus said they didn't have any religion, but the Taino religion was based on belief in a supreme deity known as Toku, who was perfect, invisible, and could not be represented in the form of idols. He was the creator of the universe, the unmoved mover. Below Toku and closer to mankind were Yukiyu, the god representing the forces of good, and Jurakan, who represented the forces of evil, and who, according to Taino beliefs, resided somewhere in the Lesser Antilles. Their chief, the top of the Taino social structure, was the chief, a Kakake, and the shaman, a Boke. There were, at the time of Columbus, on this island of Borquén, there were some 20 Kakatos, areas ruled by Kakakes, their chiefs. So it was busted up into 20 areas. They weren't a warlike people, but neither were they passive military pushovers. In the later part of the 15th century, that's 1450 through, they were locked in a perennial war with Caribs, an aggressive, brutal, and cannibalistic people who, like the Tainos, had originated in northern South America and overwhelmed and wiped out the Tainos of the Lesser Antilles. In the 1490s, southeastern Borquén was the frontier between the Taino-Caribbean and the Caribbean. Against the Caribs and the Tainos, they fought with bows and arrows and short wooden clubs. The Caribs had the upper hand, and if Columbus hadn't come, the Caribs would probably have conquered the Tainos, and which would have been more difficult for the Spaniards because the Caribs fought back very hard. So when Columbus came back, the year returned after a year. During his voyage, he came upon the Lesser Antilles, and while on his way to Hispaniola, upon Borquén. Columbus and some of the members of his crew landed in the island and took possession of it for the crown of Castile and named it San Juan Bautista in honor of Prince Juan. The Tainos, because the Spaniards were considered allies against the Caribs, were friendly and welcomed them, but it didn't work out so well. Ponce de Leon, who had come there with Columbus, and who later died in Havana, Cuba after coming to Florida, some say here to Charlotte Harbor, the Tainos there on the island were had first the Spanish were there for gold, and so and there was some gold there. But the Spaniards wouldn't work, so they were trading these hawksbells and trinkets, and the Indians finally lost their curiosity about that, and so they sort of quit working. And that's when the Spaniards instituted Repartimiento de Indios, by virtue of which the Indians were required to provide wage-free labor for the European newcomers in return for protection and the blessings of the Christian faith. And so they basically enslaved the Indians to dig for the gold. But the fabric of the Indian society was torn to shreds. Many committed suicide, killed their children, refused to have children, ran away, migrated, and they finally rose up in arms against the European oppressors. And the Indian rebellions were crushed, And finally, because there was no Indians left, they started bringing in the slaves in order to work the sugar. And this was happening about the time that the blacks in Haiti were rising up against the French. There was wars that were happening in Europe that had to do with why all this went down. So we're going to talk, should we have a 51st state? Indians don't have much to do about it. It's mostly Spanish-based culture anymore. And with America being involved very strongly from the 1850s on, and finally invading and taking over just as they were about to get their independence from Spain. We've got a caller. I'm sorry we weren't able to take it. We're going to get out of here with some Indian drumming. Can I talk to him?
Ah, yeah.
No, I hung up. That's all right.
Hold on, I'm going to kill this.